All right. So my name is Michael Santos. I'm a guy who made a lot of bad decisions when I was a kid. I was 20 years old. I saw the movie Scarface. Totally changed my life. Before that, I kind of grew up in a middle-class lifestyle. My father's an immigrant from Cuba. He came to the United States. My mother was American. And so my dad really came here with the expectations of building a business and building a new life as American. So I really never learned to speak Spanish or learned as much as perhaps I should have learned to have been an ideal son. I was a kid who made a lot of bad decisions growing up, ran around with a fast crowd, got in trouble with school, and the kind of things that parents don't want you to get in trouble to do. But I never got in trouble with the law until I was out of high school. And that really launched me into this career this scheme, I guess is a better word for it, of trafficking in cocaine. And that happened after I saw the movie Scarface, and it led me to the prison.
Okay, so what do you call yourself? ¿Cómo se llama?
Antonio Montana. And you? What you call yourself?
But this all really, my era in crime really began in 1985. I was 20 years old. I saw the movie Scarface. Actually, I remember hearing the advertisement for Scarface in 1985 on the radio, and Pacino did such a great mimic of a Cuban accent that I could hear my dad talking when I heard the commercial. So I really wanted to see the movie, not even knowing what it was about. I went to see the movie and was just totally absorbed and intrigued with this idea of fast cars and fast women and fast boats and living in Miami. And that really influenced my thought process. So I didn't know anything about the drug business. I didn't know anything. I wasn't a drug user, but I was intrigued enough by that movie to start making some inquiries. So I used to go out a lot, and I knew guys that snorted coke and that used cocaine. So I used to ask them, well, if you use cocaine, you must buy it from somewhere. Could you find out for me, what do people pay? You know, what's the going rate? And this is back in 1985 in Seattle. And I heard that the rate, as I recall, going back, was like $45,000 to $55,000 for a kilogram of cocaine. And then I called some of the people that I knew in Miami that were like me. They grew up in Miami, but their dad was from Cuba, and so they escaped, but they made their home in Miami. So I figured if they lived in Miami, they'd probably know somebody or be able to give me information. And when I heard that the price of a kilogram in Miami, which as I recall was like $21,000, $22,000, $23,000 a kilogram back then, I just saw the spread. And never having been involved in crime before, I used to delude myself into believing that if I didn't pick up the cocaine, if I didn't have the cocaine, I really wouldn't be breaking the law. So I looked for other kids that were in their 20s that were working in a job, and I knew that I could offer them more. So I'd offer somebody $1,000 or $2,000 if they would fly to Miami, rent a car and drive the car back with cocaine, and then give it to somebody else. So my whole modus operandi, so to speak, or my whole mechanism of thought was to avoid or minimize my exposure to drugs themselves, but create this machine that other people would go transport it back and distribute it to customers that I had cultivated. And I thought that I wouldn't be breaking the law, but I was really dead wrong.
Because I know we talk more, you told me a lot, but it's not something like you really talk about a lot. Like how big, you actually got at that time, and plus for how old you were.
Yeah, I wouldn't, by a prosecutor standard, I would say I got to be big enough to be charged with an 848, a continuing criminal enterprise, which was the Kingpin Statute, and it exposed me to the potential sentence of life without the possibility of parole. By my perspective, I wasn't anywhere near that big. I would say over the course of my interactions with drugs, the typical deals were 3 to 30 kilos, somewhere in there. And over the course of my involvement was probably in the vicinity of between 100 and 150 kilograms that I sold. So certainly it's a lot by law enforcement standards, and a lot, maybe by a lot of people's standards. I was a kid that may have made a couple of $1 million, which was a lot of money for a 20-year-old or a 21-year-old. But in that space, I was certainly, a minnow in, larger drug traffickers. And in my case, it was really nonviolent kids that really didn't understand what we were doing. And but I was certainly in law enforcement's eyes a serious player, and I got sentenced to 45 years in federal prison because of that.
That sounds a bit like a movie, which fits because Michael Santos' story begins with the movie Scarface.
It was just the beginning of an amazing story of crime, punishment, and redemption.
Santos was just 23 when he was convicted of trafficking cocaine in 1987.
First of all, I was 20 years old, 21 years old. I'd never been in the criminal justice system before, and I didn't understand it. And when I interacted with other people, I looked at as being far more involved in this drug empire or trafficking organizations that brought in, multiple hundreds, or if not thousands, of kilograms at a time of smugglers, and they had, where I may have had hundreds of thousands of dollars in liquidity and cash. These people had tens of millions of dollars. So from my perspective, they were like way bigger than me. But from law enforcement's perspective, I was certainly bigger than somebody who's, has a substance abuse problem and is selling 2 or 3 grams to get by and is not doing it for money. So from law enforcement's perspective, I'm actually worse than somebody who's selling on the street, because I spread this poison, as they would call it, and I paid a heavy price for it. So I don't know that our perspective's different. I think they would agree that I sold between 150 keys. Their thoughts would be, I'm deserving of 45 years for that amount of volume. Or my thoughts would be, that doesn't serve the interests of the community, and certainly nobody stopped selling cocaine because of the 45-year sentence I received. So yeah, when I got busted, it was August the 11th, 1987. For perspective, we're filming this video, I think, on August the 8th or the 9th. So it was about 32 years ago right now. 32 years ago today, I was living in Key Biscayne in Miami. Was really done with drugs. I believed that I was done with drugs, but I wasn't, because you can't make a decision and think that your criminal behavior just goes away just because you go in a different direction. So I'd been finished selling cocaine. By that time I was 23 for at least a year, and I got arrested because the authorities arrested some people that were close to me, and they had testified against me, and as a result of that testimony I became a key player, the #1 person on the indictment. And that was a sealed indictment. I got arrested on August the 11th. With guns drawn at me, you're going down, and there were 3 DEA agents. They took me into custody, and that was the last day that I had of liberty for 9,500 days. So I was in prison for 26 years, but while I was going through there, I had a mindset of, I just wanted to get out. I didn't know, the criminal justice process. I had an attorney. Of course, he knew everything that I had done, knew that I was 100% guilty. But he was telling me there's a big difference between an indictment and a conviction, and if you have the right amount of money, you can overcome it. And so I had a little cash at the time, and agreed that, okay, let's fight this thing, because the last thing I want to do is spend all this time in prison. And I truly deluded myself into believing that I was going to get out of this. And so I proceeded to go through trial. But while I'm going through trial, I learned from other people that were part of my group that the DEA had not gotten a considerable amount of drugs that I didn't even know about, but were still part of my organization. And so I helped those guys move it when I was in jail. So I was in jail. I was done with drugs before I went into prison, but when I'm in jail waiting for this trial period, I learned about this, and they asked me, can you help me connect it with somebody? And so I make that connection, and that resulted in me getting a second indictment while I was in jail. And so I went to trial. I took the stand on my trial. I perjured myself on the stand, saying I didn't do it, even though I knew that I did everything. And as a result of what I did, I got sentenced pretty harshly. The jury convicted me of every count, and I was then I was brought for the new charges, charged with perjury as well because I lied on the witness stand. And that is what resulted when my judge ultimately sentenced me. He sentenced me to 35 years for the first case, and then an additional 10 years for the second case that happened while I was in jail. So my cumulative sentence was 45 years. It was imposed in the mid-1980s, and I didn't conclude my sentence until August of 2013. So it's been just about 6 years since I finished my obligation to the Bureau of Prisons.